The first mistake Mercy Crossing made was thinking a sleeping woman had no one left to stand for her. She was curled on the far bench of the station just after midnight, beneath a cracked window where the rain came in thin and cold. The whole place smelled of wet wool, coal smoke, horse leather, and old tobacco. Outside, the northbound train sat breathing steam into the dark, its iron wheels ticking as they cooled, while the telegraph wire hummed above the roof like a warning no one wanted to hear. The woman did not move when the door opened. She did not lift her head when boots crossed the floor. She only held tighter to the blue-gray shawl wrapped in both hands, as if that small piece of cloth carried something heavier than sleep. Elias Whitaker saw her before the others did. He had come in from the rain with his hat low, his coat dark at the shoulders, and 12 miles of mud on his boots. Most men in that town knew him as a quiet cowboy who kept to the ridge road and bought his coffee without wasting words. Some called him the rail ghost, because he had worked the line years back and still seemed to hear trains long after they passed. Elias did not care what they called him. Names were cheap out here. Mercy was not. 3 men near the stove had noticed the woman too. They were not loud at first. Men like that rarely started loud. They started with little smiles, with tilted heads, with the kind of courage that only showed itself when someone else was alone. One of them pointed at the shawl. Another said she was probably carrying something worth selling. The station guard looked up from his stool, saw the Apache beadwork along her sleeve, and let his face harden into the face men wore when they wanted cruelty to look like duty. "She can't stay in here," he said. "Station ain't a camp." The woman stirred then, just enough for the lamplight to touch her cheek. She was young, maybe late 20s, with black hair loosened from a braid, dust along the hem of her dress, and rope marks around one wrist that told Elias she had not come to Mercy Crossing by choice. Above the ticket window, a wanted notice curled at the corners. Apache woman, carrying stolen army papers. Reward, $50. No name, no proof, just ink, fear, and a price. Elias read it once, then looked back at her. The smallest man at the stove stepped forward. Best wake her up and send her out. He reached toward the shawl. Elias moved before the hand got there. Not fast, not wild, just one step, placed exactly where it needed to be. The station went still. Rain tapped the window. The train hissed. The guard swallowed. "Whitaker," he muttered, "this ain't your affair." Elias took off his coat and laid it gently over the woman's shoulders. Her eyes opened at once. Dark, alert, full of old fear and new danger. A small knife appeared in her hand, steady despite the tremor in her breathing. Elias raised both palms, empty and calm. "You can keep that," he said. "A prisoner doesn't get to keep her blade." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the trick. Every person in that station waited for him to step back, to explain himself, to remember what color his skin was and what color hers was supposed to mean. But Elias only bent close enough for his voice to reach her and no farther. "Come home with me," he whispered. The words landed harder than any shout. The guard stood up. One of the men cursed under his breath. The woman stared at Elias like he had offered shelter, insult, and danger all in the same breath. Then, in a voice rough from thirst and running, she said, "If I go with you, they will burn your house." Elias looked toward the black window, where the rain was turning the street into silver mud. Then he picked up her fallen satchel with one hand and held the door open with the other. "Then we'd better leave before they find matches." They left the station through the side door, not because Elias feared the men inside, but because fear always moved faster when given an audience. The rain had softened the main street into brown ribbons of mud, and the wagon ruts shone under the lanterns like cuts across the earth. Mercy Crossing slept with one eye open. Behind every curtain window, somebody heard the station door close. Somebody saw the Apache woman step into the rain wearing a white man's coat. Somebody began building a story before either of them reached the end of the platform. Nayeli walked 2 paces behind Elias, never beside him, never close enough for his shadow to cover hers. Her knife was hidden again, but not forgotten. He could feel the distance she kept as plainly as cold water down his collar. The blue-gray shawl stayed pressed to her chest beneath his coat, protected from the rain by both arms. Elias did not ask what was inside it. A man who needed to know every secret before showing mercy was not merciful. He was only curious. They passed the freight office, the shuttered bakery, the livery stable where one horse stamped and snorted at the smell of storm. At the far end of town, the church bell hung black against the sky, silent, though Elias had once heard it ring for men who did not deserve mourning and stay quiet for women who did. Mercy Crossing had rules like that. It remembered what helped the powerful. It forgot what hurt the innocent. "Your town hates my face," Nayeli said at last. Her voice was low, careful, shaped by exhaustion but not broken by it. Elias kept walking. "This town hates anything it cannot own." She gave a small sound, not quite a laugh. "And you?" "I own 3 horses, 1 cabin, and a coffee pot that leaks." "That is not an answer." Elias glanced back just enough to see her eyes under the brim of his hat, black and bright in the rain. "No," he said. "It is the only answer I have earned." She studied him as they moved past the last row of buildings and into the open road. The prairie beyond town lay dark and wide, smelling of sagebrush and wet dust. A mile east, lightning opened the sky for a heartbeat, showing the low ridge where Elias lived, the crooked fence, and the single yellow lamp burning in his cabin window. Nayeli stopped when she saw it. Elias stopped too, leaving 6 feet between them. "There are 2 doors," he said, "front and back. You can leave by either one. White men say that before locking both." He nodded once, not offended. "Then you can sleep in the chair facing them." That answer troubled her more than anger would have. Anger was simple. Kindness was a country with hidden trails. She had seen soldiers offer blankets and take names. She had seen traitors smile while weighing lies on brass scales. She had seen men use soft voices like rope. Elias Whitaker's softness had edges she could not measure, and that made it harder to trust. When they reached the cabin, he opened the door and stepped aside. He did not touch her back. He did not guide her in. The room was plain, warm, and lonely. A stove glowed red in the corner. A tin cup sat beside a Bible with dust on it. A woman's faded ribbon hung from a nail near the window, so old the color had nearly left it. Nayeli noticed it. Elias noticed her noticing. "My sisters," he said. Nothing more. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls like a hand testing strength. Elias set her satchel by the table and placed a clean blanket on the chair nearest the stove. Then he took the small key from his pocket, laid it beside her knife on the table, and pushed both toward her. "Door locks from the inside," he said. "You decide if it does." Nayeli stared at the key. For the first time since the station, her grip on the shawl loosened by half an inch. Then a horse sounded in the distance, far behind them on the road from town. 1 rider. Maybe 2. Elias turned toward the window, and the warmth in the cabin seemed to shrink. Nayeli whispered, "I told you they would come." Elias lowered the lamp until the room fell into amber shadow. "I believed you." The hoofbeats stopped before they reached the cabin, and that was worse than if they had come charging all the way to the door. Men with honest business did not halt in the dark and let the rain speak for them. Elias stood beside the window, not in front of it, with the lamp turned low and his hat still dripping on the floorboards. Nayeli sat near the stove with the blanket around her shoulders, but her eyes had gone sharp again. Tired as she was, she listened like someone who had survived by hearing danger before seeing it. The cabin held its breath. 1 drop of water fell from the roof into the barrel outside. A horse snorted somewhere beyond the fence. Then came a voice from the yard. "Whitaker." It was Deputy Harlan Pike, younger than the sheriff, but old enough to have learned cowardice from better men. Elias did not answer right away. Silence was useful. It made liars spend more words than they planned. "Whitaker," Pike called again. "Station guard says you walked off with a wanted Apache woman. Sheriff Crowley wants her brought in before sunup." Nayeli looked at Elias then, waiting to see which kind of man he would become with the law at his door. Elias kept his hands empty and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him but not latching it. Rain ran off the brim of his hat in a steady silver line. In the yard, Pike sat on a bay horse with another rider behind him, both wrapped in slickers, both trying to look official in the dark. "Evening, Harlan," Elias said. "Little late for visiting." Pike shifted in the saddle. His eyes kept moving to the cabin window. "You got her in there?" "Got coffee in there." "This is serious." "Coffee usually is, after midnight." The second rider leaned forward, but Pike lifted a hand to stop him. He did not want trouble. Not real trouble. He wanted obedience dressed up as peace. "Sheriff says she stole army papers from Fort Belden," Pike said. "Says she may be part of a raiding party." Elias looked past him toward the road, where Mercy Crossing sat unseen but not asleep. Did the sheriff say her name? Pike blinked. What? Her name. The woman you came to collect. Poster did not say. Did it say who saw her steal those papers? Pike's jaw worked once. That is not my concern. It ought to be. The words landed quiet, but they landed straight. Pike's face tightened. Men like him hated being reminded that a badge did not make thinking optional. Beneath one stitched corner, the hidden paper pressed against her palm like a pulse. Pike leaned closer. Elias, do not make this hard. Folks are already talking. They saw her wearing your coat. They saw you bring her here. Elias glanced back at the door, then at Pike. Good. Pike frowned. If anything happened to Naeli now, Mercy Crossing would not get to pretend she had simply vanished. The deputy swallowed. Sheriff will come himself next time. Then tell him to bring evidence with his boots. Pike stared at him, searching for the old quiet cowboy everyone thought they knew. But there was something else on that porch now, something carved by grief and held in place by restraint. At last, Pike turned his horse. The second rider followed, less certain than when he came. Their hoofbeats faded into wet darkness, slow at first, then quicker once the cabin disappeared behind them. Elias waited until he could not hear them anymore. Only then did he step back inside. Naeli had not moved. The knife lay on the table beside the key. The shawl lay across her lap. Her eyes held suspicion still, but it had changed shape. Why did you not tell them I was gone? She asked. Elias removed his hat and set it near the stove. Steam rose from the felt. Because that would make you a secret. And what am I now? He looked at the key, the knife, the shawl, then at her face. A guest. Naeli laughed once, soft and bitter. A guest with men coming for her. Most guests in this country have worse manners. She did not smile, but something in her shoulders lowered. Only a little. Enough for the firelight to notice. Elias filled a tin cup with water and set it on the table, halfway between them. Not close. Not far. You can sleep, he said. I will sit by the door. To keep me in? To keep them out. The answer should not have touched her. It was only words. White men had plenty of words. Yet the cabin was warm. The key was within reach, and her knife had not been taken. Naeli looked toward the old ribbon hanging by the window. Your sister, she said. Elias did not turn. She was 16. What happened? His face closed, not with anger, but with the kind of pain that had learned to live without visitors. A town saw her needing help and decided she was somebody else's burden. Naeli understood that more than she wanted to. The stove clicked softly. Outside, thunder moved away across the prairie. For the first time in 3 nights, her eyelids grew heavy without fear dragging them open. But just before sleep took her, Elias heard her whisper one sentence into the fire. There are children. He went still. Naeli's hand tightened over the shawl. 6 of them, she said, hidden less than 20 miles from here. The word children changed the cabin more than thunder ever could. Elias did not move for a long moment. He stood with one hand near the back of the chair, listening to the stove, the rain, and the thin breath of a woman who had carried too much danger alone. Naeli seemed to regret speaking. Her eyes dropped to the shawl, and both hands closed around it again, careful and fierce. Forget I said that, she whispered. Elias looked toward the window, where the glass showed only the blurred shape of his own face. I have tried forgetting children in trouble before, he said. It does not take. Naeli studied him in the low firelight. She wanted to measure whether pity had made him foolish or grief had made him useful. There was a difference. A foolish man rushed toward danger because it made him feel brave. A useful man knew how to move slowly enough to keep others alive. 6 children, she said at last. The youngest is 5. The oldest is 12. They are hidden in Dry Creek Canyon, under a shelf of red stone, near a spring that tastes of iron. Elias sat down across from her, leaving the table between them like neutral ground. Apache children? She lifted her chin. Children. The correction was soft, but it cut clean. Elias accepted it with a nod. Outside, the last rainwater slid from the eaves in steady drops. The storm was passing east, but the night still held its secrets close. Naeli loosened one stitched corner of the blue-gray shawl. Her fingers were careful, almost reverent. From inside the seam, she drew out a folded scrap of paper, no bigger than a playing card, worn thin from being opened and closed too many times. It held a rough map and charcoal lines. A creek bed. A crooked cottonwood. 3 hills, shaped like sleeping cattle. Elias leaned forward but did not reach for it. She noticed that. You do not grab. Not unless something is falling. Most men grab before they ask. Most men lose more than they hold. Her eyes flicked to his sister's faded ribbon by the window, then away. Some grief did not need questions. She placed the map flat on the table and touched one mark with her finger. There. They were taken from a winter camp after soldiers came looking for stolen horses. The horses were not there. The men did not care. My sister hid the children before she was captured. She gave me the shawl. She told me to run west, find help, and trust no station, no badge, no man who smiles too much. Crowley, Elias said. Naeli's silence answered him. Sheriff Abel Crowley had always smiled as though the world owed him agreement. Elias had seen that smile at auctions, church suppers, courthouse steps, anywhere a man could trade decency for influence and call it order. Why would he want children? Elias asked, though part of him already knew the shape of the answer. Naeli folded the map once, then stopped, as if even hiding it again hurt. Because frightened towns pay for enemies, even small ones. If he finds them, he will call them proof. Proof of raids, proof of danger, proof that more riders, more guns, more money must come through Mercy Crossing. Elias closed his eyes for half a breath. The room smelled of smoke and wet wool. When he opened them, Naeli was watching him with the hardest kind of hope, the kind that expected betrayal and prepared for it early. I can get them out before dawn, he said. No, her answer came quick. You do not know the canyon. I know Dry Creek. You know the road to it. That is not the same. Then you show me. She gave a tired shake of her head. If I go, Crowley follows. If I stay, he searches here. Either way, the children lose. Elias looked at the map, then at the table, then at the key still lying beside her knife. An idea came slowly, with no shine on it. Good ideas rarely looked noble at first. They looked like work. At first light, he said, you walk into town with me. Naeli stared. That is your plan. Part of it. That is not a plan. That is surrender. Only if we walk in as strangers. Her eyes narrowed. Elias leaned back, voice calm. Crowley wants a wanted woman. He wants a story people already believe. So we give Mercy Crossing a different story before he can finish his. What story? He hesitated, because this part would cost her pride, and pride was sometimes the last blanket a hunted person owned. I tell them you are my wife. The cabin fell silent. Even the stove seemed to pause. Naeli rose from the chair so fast the blanket slipped from her shoulders. No, it would slow him down. It would shame me. Elias stood too, but kept his distance. Then I will not say it. The answer struck her harder than the suggestion. She had been ready for argument, not retreat. He looked toward the door, where dawn had not yet come, but was already threatening the dark. I will not use your name, your body, or your life as a tool without your leave. Not even to save you. Naeli held his gaze. The anger in her eyes remained, but underneath it something shifted, uncertain and human. And if I give leave? She asked. Elias answered quietly. Then I lie to protect your freedom, not to claim it. The first gray light touched the window. Far off, from the direction of town, a bell rang once. Not church. Alarm. Naeli turned toward the sound. Elias reached for his hat. The map lay between them, small enough to hide in a palm, heavy enough to pull a whole town into judgment. The bell rang a second time before they reached the town road, thin and anxious across the wet morning. Mercy Crossing had woken mean. Smoke lifted from chimneys, horses stamped in muddy stalls, and faces gathered behind windows with the pale hunger of people waiting to see another person judged. Elias walked on Naeli's left, not touching her, close enough to show he stood with her, far enough to show he did not own the space around her. She had agreed to the lie with one condition. You do not call me wife unless I nod first. Elias had said. Then I will watch for your nod like sunrise. She had not smiled, but she had wrapped the blue-gray shawl across her shoulders and tucked the real map deep inside a hidden seam. What Elias carried in his coat pocket was only a copy, drawn wrong in 3 careful places. Dry Creek would look true to a man who did not know it. To a child hiding under red stone, it would mean nothing at all. At the edge of town, they passed the blacksmith's shed, where the hammer had stopped mid-strike. They passed the bakery, where flour dust clung to the baker's hands like ash. Nobody greeted Elias. Nobody dared greet Nayeli. The wanted notice had been nailed to 3 more walls since midnight. Apache woman. Stolen army papers. Reward, $50. Ink traveled fast when fear carried it. Sheriff Abel Crowley stood near the station steps, polished boots clean despite the mud, silver badge bright as a lie. Deputy Pike waited behind him, eyes low. A cluster of townspeople filled the platform, some wrapped in shawls, some holding coffee, all pretending they had come by accident. Crowley smiled when he saw them. It was the smile of a man who thought the ending had already been written. "Mr. Whitaker," he called. "You saved me a ride." Elias stopped 10 feet from the station steps. Nayeli stopped with him. The train behind Crowley breathed steam along the tracks, white and restless. "Morning, Sheriff." Crowley's eyes moved over Nayeli, then to the shawl, then back to Elias. "You are harboring a wanted woman." The crowd murmured, pleased by the official sound of it. Elias took off his hat, shook rain from the brim, and held it at his side. "No," he said. "I am walking with my wife." The word struck the platform like a dropped lantern. A woman gasped. A man near the ticket window laughed once, then stopped when nobody joined him. Crowley's smile thinned. Nayeli's face remained still, but her hand found the edge of the shawl. Elias had not looked at her when he said it. He had waited for the smallest nod. She had given it before anyone else could see. "Your wife," Crowley repeated. "That is a powerful, sudden marriage. Storms make people hurry. You expect this town to believe you married an Apache woman between midnight and breakfast?" Elias looked across the platform, letting his gaze rest on the baker, the blacksmith, the widow from Elm Street, every soul who had once asked him to fix a fence, pull a calf, lend a horse, or stand quiet at a grave. "No," he said. "I expect this town to ask why a poster with no name is worth more than a living woman with one." Nayeli turned her head slightly. In that small motion, Elias felt her surprise more than saw it. Crowley stepped down one stair. "Her name is not the concern. It is if you mean to take her." The sheriff's jaw tightened. His hand did not reach for anything. It did not need to. Men with power often made others imagine the threat for them. "She has stolen property," Crowley said. "Army papers hidden in that shawl." The crowd leaned forward. Nayeli's fingers tightened, but her voice came clear. "You have not asked me what I carry." Crowley looked at her as if a chair had spoken. "I do not bargain with fugitives." "Then you should not invent them." The words were quiet, and that made them worse for him. Elias saw Deputy Pike lift his eyes. A little shame moved across the young man's face and disappeared. Crowley extended one hand. "The shawl." Elias stepped half a pace forward. "Bring a warrant." "I am the warrant in this town." "That is the trouble." The platform went silent enough to hear rainwater dripping from the roof. Crowley's smile vanished. For 1 second, every person there saw the man beneath the badge, and some of them looked away because seeing clearly is its own burden. Then Nayeli did something Elias did not expect. She untied the shawl and held it out. The crowd breathed in together. Crowley reached for it. But before his fingers touched the cloth, Nayeli let the folded copy slip from the seam into Elias's palm. Only Elias felt it. Only Crowley saw his coat move. And in that brief glance, Elias knew the sheriff had taken the bait. Crowley did not follow them at once. That was how Elias knew the sheriff was certain he had already won. A desperate man chased. A confident man waited for others to walk into the pen he had built. Elias and Nayeli left the station under the weight of 100 watching eyes, moving past the freight wagons, past the water tower, past the 3 fresh wanted notices nailed crooked in the rain. Nobody stopped them. Nobody blessed them. The town simply opened a narrow path and let them pass, the way grass bends before a snake. Nayeli kept her face forward, but Elias could feel the anger beside him, quiet and hot. "He saw you take the paper," she said when they reached the livery. "He was meant to." Elias tightened the cinch on his dun horse. "Then he will follow the wrong creek." "And what will you follow?" He looked at her across the saddle. Morning light touched the wet braid over her shoulder, and the blue-gray shawl now folded beneath her coat, empty on the outside, dangerous on the inside. "You," he said. She looked away first. Not because the word was sweet, but because it was plain. Plain words were harder to defend against. They rode east for 2 miles, slow enough to be seen, then turned north behind the old mill and cut through a dry wash that bent toward the ridge. By noon, Mercy Crossing had shrunk behind them into a smear of roofs and smoke. The prairie opened wide, brown and silver after the storm, with jackrabbits darting through sage and hawks circling high enough to see every lie a man tried to hide. Nayeli rode ahead now. Out there, away from town, she changed. Her shoulders lowered. Her eyes read the land the way Elias read weather. A broken grass stem. A stone turned pale side up. A crow rising from the wrong place. Every small thing spoke to her, and every small thing mattered. You know this country better than any map, Elias said. A map is what men make when they believe land belongs to paper. And what is land to you? She did not turn when she asked it. Elias thought of his cabin, his fence, his sister's ribbon fading by the window. A place that remembers your footsteps after people forget your name. Nayeli slowed her horse until they rode side by side. For nearly a quarter mile, neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer empty. It had begun to carry trust, and trust, Elias knew, could be heavier than guilt. Near Dry Creek, they found the first sign that Crowley had not come alone. Fresh hoofprints crossed the wash, at least 5 riders, moving fast toward the false trail. Nayeli crouched beside the tracks, touched the wet edge of one print, and looked toward the red hills. He took the bait. Elias nodded. For now, you do not sound pleased. A fooled man gets angry when the trick turns clear. She stood. Then we move before his anger learns direction. They reached the canyon at dusk. Red stone rose on both sides, warm with the last light, and the spring below made a thin, steady sound like water whispering through teeth. Nayeli gave a low call, not loud, not shaped like English, and the canyon seemed to listen before answering. One by one, 6 children stepped from beneath the rock shelf. Small faces, dusty clothes, eyes too old for the bodies that carried them. The youngest held a carved wooden horse with one ear missing. Elias felt something in his chest pull tight. Nayeli knelt, and the children came to her without a word. She touched each head, each shoulder, counting with her hands as if numbers alone could not be trusted. 6. All 6. Elias looked away to give them the privacy of relief. Then the oldest boy pointed past him. On the trail above, a horse had appeared against the fading sky. Deputy Harlan Pike sat alone, hat in hand, breathing hard from the ride. Elias reached for nothing. Nayeli rose slowly, placing herself between Pike and the children. The deputy lifted both hands. I did not come for them, he called. His voice shook, but it did not lie cleanly enough to be false. Crowley knows the map was wrong. He is riding back to town now. He says if Whitaker wants to protect Apache children, he can answer for it at the station. Elias went still. Nayeli turned toward him. No. He looked at the 6 children, then at the ridge road leading west. If he cannot find them, Elias said, he will need someone else to hang his story on. You are not going back. Her voice was low, almost broken by restraint. Elias mounted his horse. I am not going back to surrender. Nayeli stepped close enough that the children stopped breathing behind her. Then why? Elias looked down at her, and in the last light, his face held no glory, no fear, only the tired dignity of a man choosing the cost before anyone else could pay it. Because a lie told in public has to die there. The ride back to Mercy Crossing felt longer than the 20 miles between canyon and town. Elias rode alone for the first hour, with the last color of dusk fading behind him and the prairie turning black on both sides of the trail. He expected Nayeli to follow. He hoped she would not. Hope, he had learned, was often just fear wearing a cleaner coat. Behind him, Dry Creek held 6 children beneath red stone, Deputy Pike with his hat in his hands, and a woman who had already carried enough sorrow for one lifetime. Ahead of him waited a station platform, a sheriff with a wounded pride, and a town hungry to believe the easiest lie. By the time Elias reached the first lanterns of Mercy Crossing, night had settled low and cold. The whole town was awake. Not lively. Awake. There is a difference. Lively towns laugh, sing, spill coffee, slam doors. Awake towns whisper behind glass and wait for someone else to decide what courage costs. The station lamps burned brighter than usual, throwing yellow light across the wet boards. Sheriff Abel Crowley stood near the ticket window with his thumbs tucked in his belt, surrounded by men who looked at the ground whenever Elias looked at them. The false map lay open on the counter beside a coil of rope, a coffee cup, and Crowley's silver badge. There he is, Crowley said, loud enough for every window to hear. The man who lied to his own people for a fugitive. Elias dismounted slowly. His horse shook rain from its mane, though the sky had cleared hours ago. The smell of coal smoke drifted from the idling freight engine on the far track. You found the creek, Elias said. Found empty rocks and bad directions. Crowley stepped down from the platform. His smile had become something thin and dry. You thought that made you clever. No, Elias said. I thought it made the children safe. The word children moved through the crowd like a match under paper. Some faces changed. Not many. Enough. Crowley heard it and raised his voice. There are no children. There are thieves. There are scouts. There are enemies too small to hold a rifle today and old enough to raise one tomorrow. Elias looked at the people gathered near the station doors. The baker, the blacksmith, Widow Marin from Elm Street. Deputy Pike was not among them. That troubled him less than it should have. A man absent at the right time might be doing something useful. Say their names, Elias said. Crowley frowned. What? If they are enemies, say their names. The platform quieted. The train hissed steam behind them. Somewhere, a loose shutter tapped against a wall. Crowley's eyes hardened. You do not get to put this town on trial. No, Elias said. You already did that. Crowley stepped close enough for Elias to smell tobacco on his coat. You had a quiet life, Whitaker. You could have kept your head down. Instead, you chose an Apache woman over your own kind. Elias did not answer at once. He looked toward the bench where Nayeli had slept the night before. It sat empty beneath the cracked window, holding the shape of memory better than Wood had any right to. My own kind, he said softly, are the ones who do not leave a tired woman in the rain. Crowley's face flushed. He turned to the crowd. Listen to him. This is what happens when weakness dresses itself up as mercy. Then the station bell rang. Once. Not from the tower. From the track. Every head turned as the freight engine groaned forward half a car length, releasing a cloud of white steam that rolled across the platform. Through it came Deputy Pike, walking slow, empty hands raised. Behind him came Nayeli. The blue-gray shawl rested over her shoulders, and 6 children walked close behind her, each one silent, each one real. Beyond them, on the dark edge of the tracks, Apache riders sat their horses without a word. Not charging, not threatening, only present. Crowley froze. The town did too. Nayeli stepped onto the platform and placed the shawl on the ticket counter. Her hands did not shake. She opened the seam and drew out a small leather ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, marked with Crowley's own initials. You wanted what I carried, she said. Here it is. Elias looked at the ledger, then at Crowley. The sheriff's mouth opened, but no sound came. Nayeli turned the pages for everyone to see. Names, ages, prices, dates. 6 children listed beside dollar amounts, and more names beneath them, crossed out in Crowley's careful hand. Nobody reached for a gun. Nobody moved toward the Apache riders. Nobody looked proud of the law anymore. The baker removed his hat. Widow Marin covered her mouth. The blacksmith stared at Crowley as if seeing him for the first time and wishing he had seen him sooner. Elias stood beneath the station light, dust on his coat, mud on his boots, and felt no victory. Only the heavy silence that comes when truth enters a room and finds every chair occupied by fear. Crowley whispered, That is not mine. Deputy Pike stepped forward and laid the sheriff's spare key beside the ledger. I took it from your desk, he said. Same drawer. Same lock. The silver badge on Crowley's chest suddenly looked smaller than a button. Nayeli closed the ledger, then looked at Elias, not as a rescued woman, not as a fugitive, but as someone who had walked through fire and refused to become smoke. The rope still lay on the counter between them. She picked it up, set it aside, and whispered, No more stories from him. Crowley did not run. Men like him rarely did when the whole town was watching. He stood behind the ticket counter with the ledger closed in front of him, one hand resting near the silver badge on his chest, as if touching it might make the truth afraid. But truth had already crossed the tracks. It had come in with wet boots, 6 silent children, 1 tired woman, and a deputy who had finally chosen the side his badge had promised. Deputy Pike stepped onto the platform and removed Crowley's badge without a word. The sound was small, just metal against cloth, yet it carried farther than any gunshot would have. Crowley looked at the crowd for rescue, but the crowd had become a mirror, and no man likes seeing himself clearly after years of being believed. The baker looked down at his flower-white hands. The blacksmith folded his arms and did not move. Widow Marin walked to the youngest child and offered her a clean handkerchief, not as apology, not as payment, just as the first decent thing anybody in Mercy Crossing had done without being told. Nayeli watched it happen with the blue-gray shawl gathered in her hands. Her face gave away nothing, but Elias saw how carefully she counted the children again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Safe was not a word she trusted until she could touch it. The Apache riders remained beyond the platform, still as carved dusk, their horses breathing white in the cold. They had not come to take revenge. They had come to witness whether the town had any honor left to recognize. That was a harder judgment than violence, and every person there seemed to feel the weight of it. Pike turned to Elias. "I will ride to Fort Belden at first light," he said. "There are officers who need to see this ledger." Elias looked at Crowley, then at the children. "Make sure the children's names are spoken before his." Pike nodded. "They will be." Morning did not arrive all at once. It entered in strips of gray along the station roof, in pale fire over the rails, in the slow softening of faces that had spent the night pretending hardness was strength. The train engineer stepped down from the cab and removed his cap. No one told him to. The station guard who had wanted Nayeli thrown into the rain came forward with his keys, his mouth working around words too late to be useful. Nayeli looked at him only once. That was enough. He set the keys down and stepped back. Some forgiveness is not owed. Some silence says so. Elias picked up his coat from the bench where she had first slept and shook the dust from it. The bench looked smaller now, less like a place of shame, more like a marker in the road where one life had turned and carried others with it. He walked to Nayeli and held out the coat. She did not take it. Instead, she lifted the blue-gray shawl and placed it across his shoulders. The gesture was quiet, almost plain, but the Apache riders saw it. The children saw it. Mercy Crossing saw it. Elias looked down at the woven cloth, at the careful stitches that had hidden fear, proof, memory, and hope in the same seam. "This belongs to you," he said. Nayeli's eyes rested on him, dark and steady. "It carried me as far as it could." He had no answer for that. Some words were too small for the land they stood on. The 6 children were led toward the riders, where waiting arms gathered them close. No cheers rose from the platform. No music played. The West had enough noise. What it lacked was reverence, and for once, Mercy Crossing gave silence the room it deserved. Nayeli turned toward the eastern road, where red hills waited beyond 20 miles of wet prairie. Elias followed her gaze, then looked back toward his cabin ridge, the leaking coffee pot, the 2 doors, the faded ribbon by the window. His life stood there like an old coat on a peg, familiar and empty. "You are free to go," he said. Nayeli almost smiled, but not quite. "So are you." The words unsettled him more than danger had. Freedom, he thought, was not always a gate opening. Sometimes it was a hand not asking to hold you, only showing where the road began. She stepped down from the platform. Then she stopped and looked back. The first sunlight caught the edge of her face, the beadwork at her sleeve, the tired grace in her shoulders. "Come home with me," she said. This time, the words did not sound like rescue. They sounded like a question the whole world had been too afraid to ask. Elias looked once at Mercy Crossing. No one laughed. No one spoke against it. The rails shone gold under the morning sun, stretching east and west like choices. He walked down from the platform and stood beside her, not ahead, not behind. Side by side, they started toward the red hills, while behind them, a town that had mistaken fear for law watched 2 people leave with nothing but a shawl, 6 saved names, and a silence strong enough to